Hi everyone, it's Brennan here, and I'm back with a brand new tutorial of the Jade Warriors from the new Warhammer Fantasy Army of the Grand Cathay. Games Workshop has been kind enough to send me a preview copy of the new army set and to share with you all on how I've painted them with my own Cathay province. These new miniatures are just amazing. It's been particularly exciting to see the old world finally go further east into the Grand Cathay. Also, being half Chinese from my mother's side, it's a wonderful sense of pride and happiness comes through with some Chinese representation in the form of an entire army from Games Workshop. But before we lay down some paint, it's good to go over a brief use of colors in the scheme to give you some context into how I'm composing them. The two primary colors presented is the red and yellow, followed by some spot color of jade. All of the soft cloth, under the shirt, helmet, and halberd plumes are all bold red, while the yellow is split between the desaturated yellow to make for the golden icons and a strong saturated golden yellow on the banner itself. All of the leather and in between items are pretty much just made out of black. It can be intimidating at first to see that these models have a lot of overlapping details, to which gives their armor a distinct ancient Chinese design. But by simplifying the leather details and making the scales a silver, which is essentially another form of gray, this makes the red and the yellow details punch out and have a very strong silhouette. The parts and the colors I really want to stand out. So you will notice that in the red and the yellow, I've put the most effort and a little bit of extra highlighting stages to really make them stand out and relax more on the in between stages of the various parts of leathers and straps, and even the pouches if you decided to put on the extra accessories. The majority of the paints themselves, though, are all from the Ionic Smart Paint range by MIG Ammo. I've been really happy with the way these paints have been performing on my brush, and it also lends themselves very well to my painting style. They have really wonderful coverage, good spread, and application finish for me. They mix really well within the range, and they also play really nicely with my other preferred range of paints of Chimera. It's a great pleasure to have them supporting my painting and able to pass some savings on to all with a little discount code shopping at migjimenez.com. Just put in BB Ionic 10 at the checkout to receive 10% off your entire paint order. The code doesn't expire, and each purchase with this code gives me a matching kickback, supporting me. So, if you'd like to get some of these paints for yourself, just consider getting them direct and using my code. All right, I think that's enough lead up time. Let's just get our paints out, our palettes, brushes, and let's get painting. All right, let's get painting. So for this part, we're going to be using the airbrush and giving you some initial base layers. Now, for the unit champion, I actually start off with a coat of burnt umber and black. Later on, I found out after doing this, because since he was the test model per se, later on we can substitute this for giving the base coat of how I do the black. And that's going to be a mixture right here of black and salmon. So these two colors will give us a slightly warmer black. So if you want to not do the black plus burnt umber, I highly suggest making this mixture here, running it through the airbrush and giving the entire model, a base coat of this rather than the umber. The umber is nice for the red, but I think it's more advantageous to give the entire model at the beginning this coat of this black plus salmon, and that's actually what I do for the rest of the unit. Again, like I said at the beginning of the tutorial, this is the first model I painted of the Cathay unit, just as a test. We always pick up one model to kind of figure out a paint scheme. And, I'm no different. I'm not going to batch paint an entire unit without testing out the colors first. But if you're doing it this way, I'm just going through here and just giving all the black areas a nice, easy coat. Good thing is, it's a dark color, black and a little bit of salmon. goes on, covers really nicely, nice and smooth with these ionic paints, and goes through it quite easy. We're also going to lay down a base coat of silver. So this is from the Vallejo Metal Series steel. This paint is runs really nicely through the airbrush, but when you use it through the brush, it's just naturally very thin. But in particular, when it comes to all the scaled armor, which is kind of a nice nod to like the whole dragon theme of the army, the paint seeps in quite nicely. Just being careful and trying to be as tidy as possible to, not to overspill. And that's a big theme with the Cathay stuff, since there's a lot of overlapping elements. Just naturally how a lot of ancient Chinese armor is all portrayed, a lot of layers of leathers and other and cloth and materials and such. So they do give it in these miniatures, so you just have to take a little bit of extra time not to spill over too much. But going into base coating the red, I really love the red, and that's one of the primary things I've really wanted to feature in the army itself. So all the red details are going to be covered here, and I'm just mixing in the wine red and burnt umber together. Nice thing is, since I base coated this guy, the burnt umber, this this kind of just marries even nicer. But it was no problem again going off if you were going to base coat the with the airbrush at the very beginning with the black and salmon mixture. There was no real difference here. They both covered really well. But just in these stages, just like the silver and such, it just pays to be just a little bit tidier, maybe not have that second coffee or, just kind of keep like a fairly steady hand. When it comes to these small details, like on the unit leader here with that, like the kind of like filigree, I'm not worrying about the detail in the front. I just want to get the background base red. So, you're kind of just seeing me just put it all over the entire spot there without too much worry. Same thing is with the belly plate as well. Probably one of the most hardest parts to get, especially on a few of the hand positions, is the cloth in the inside there as well. So even in the inner sleeves, I've painted all red. So all the cloth on these guys are going to be all red. Even though there's a bunch of strap details that run across the forearms to hold the armor in position, at this stage here when doing the red, don't worry about it. You can cover those, and when the red is all complete, we can always go back with our black highlight color and just repaint in those straps if that's a detail that you want to cover up. Besides the cloth, the other more important detail here is to also get the ties, the knots that are in at the front of the collar together in red. The red's also very much used in Chinese culture a lot, just for, it's lucky. There's a lot of bold things that are nice and red, to like Lycee, red envelope, lucky money. And even just with like various charms and such, red, they're always, almost all the knots and stuff are always dyed in red. So for me, that was also important to express that through the entire Cathay army. To base coat the gold trims, I wanted to do a little bit of, I guess, pseudo N&M. There's not a ton of space to see a lot of more complex N&M really. Maybe just on the unit leader, it's on the shoulder. But I liked more of this. I wanted a desaturated yellow gold. The thing is, I didn't want it to compete, which you will see later is with the golden banner. So if I didn't want the armor of the gold to clash with that, I want them to be very distinct. So the base coat here of this gold is with like the brown, green, and burnt umber mixture at the beginning, just to base coat these areas here. The nice thing is on the infantry, the only real gold kind of trim they have is on the two little plates on the shoulders. So for the most part, the unit doesn't get a ton of gold. It's just the unit leader has a little bit more, along with the command sections. So later on, like the same pale gold that's on the armor trim will also be present on the musician and the standard. Moving more into highlight, just adding more salmon into the mix for the first base layer, and just doing some simple layering just on a few areas to punch out some highlights. This also can include, or can just be, edge highlighting, for instance, but a little bit of volumetric highlighting if you want to take it there. I'm doing that on the decorative shoulder plates here, but most of the stuff of the black leather is pretty much trim. So you can grab this highlight color and add a little bit more salmon to warmth and start edge highlighting. If you're enjoying this tutorial and you want even more in-depth tutorials that revolve past just gaming miniatures and going into more display, golden demon projects, and so forth, or you just want to have more expansions into more advanced techniques and more in-depth tutorials, please consider checking out and joining my Patreon. I have several different tiers for different levels of commitment and in terms of feedback to help you grow and expand and to develop your miniature painting. And of course, for whatever reason, if you still want to stick with all my YouTube tutorials, please just give it a like, maybe share it with a friend or two that you think that this tutorial would benefit, and leave a comment below if you have any questions or just want to share some of your excitement for the new Cathay range as much as I am. Please do so. Every single little bit of your support helps, either through sharing or joining the Patreon as well. Just getting through here, just taking your time picking out a little bits of these highlights. In more particular, the most important part of these highlights really is the front, and the first front two ranks. I can always relax a little bit, especially if you're doing a bigger unit, but making the front unit, especially the command, really stand out and help on the tabletop. Now, with all those base layers covered in here, we're just going to continue on with a little bit more of the black, but now we're just going to add in some ivory. If you notice, you can always substitute this for white if you like, but it makes small little differences, helping out a little bit of the warmer, the warmer theme, especially with the black, or our gray rather, being mixed with that salmon and black mixed together to make sort of this warmer gray. So the final highlights here, just adding a little bit of ivory. Make sure you don't actually go straight up to ivory. That'd be a little bit too bright and a little bit overkill. And for the most part, trying to keep these highlights nice and small. I have a general rule where I don't mind if the highlights get a little bit bigger at the top half of the model. So think of the waist and up, and as they go lower, they become very, very small, almost like little dots at the end. This kind of just helps give the character, for me, a little bit of it feels like it's a little more scaled in terms of height. There's a lot more light that is much more above, and as light falls, we get casted more into shadow. And especially for rank and file troops, this could be amplified even further, since especially with the units that are in the back, we can really relax the amount of edge highlights we put, definitely from the waist down. This will actually also kind of naturally give the illusion or the feeling that they're within a unit, because when they're all tightly packed, it should cast some natural shadows down below. We won't see them. Again, maybe the only ones you want to mark out when you're doing this, if you have them, assembled in a line, just maybe give a little tick on the front of the unit. So the ones that are standing in the front, probably the most obvious is the command. But, with the few soldiers that are going to be in the front there, giving them just a little bit of extra love in terms of highlights throughout the entire model. And then we can kind of relax a little bit, especially when we get to the second, third, fourth ranks, etc., etc. But, especially since this guy's the unit leader, just giving him those extra bit of highlights all the way down onto the boots and such. With paint application, I'm not trying to utilize any not utilizing any kind of sort of like glazing or anything like that. This is pretty much just straight paint. I'm not using too much thinner or thinning the paint on the palette at all. I like to leave a little bit of moisture in with the brush at the time. So, anytime you rinse your brush and you want to wipe it dry, instead of giving the feeling the usual 3 to 4 wipes, maybe just 1 or 2, just so your brush is not dripping wet when you're going to put it back on the palette. But just a little bit of moisture in there to help the paint flow a little bit more. These ionic paints have great coverage, first of all, and we're just doing simple layering throughout this entire process of this of the tutorial. Also, by thinning the paint less on the palette, especially in those hot summer days, that paint is not going to dry out on you. So we're going to extend the drying time that's even on a wet palette in a hot spring summer day. I hope maybe you feel that kind of pain when the paint kind of dries out. So I like to avoid pre-diluting the paint on the palette as much as I can. Keep the dilution more within the brush. And I can see you can have your paint last a little bit longer on the palette. All right. Now for probably one of my favorite parts of the entire army, and to make sure that this is going to punch out, is doing the red, making sure that lucky red really comes out, and to me is one of the major shows of the entire paint scheme here. So the main paints you're going to need here, so besides that base red, which was made out of that wine red and burnt umber, now we're taking that mixture and we're adding some superhero red into the mix here. And you can kind of see that on the palette. It starts to get a little bit lighter. Now, how I like to add highlights here is about like volumetric highlighting. And without getting into the complexities or trying to make this too complex, and for people that may not be as familiar with volumetric highlighting, one of the main key things is you're really taking a look and you're looking at the reflections under your lamp. Even through this video right now, you can actually see even our base coat of that wine red. You can actually see the light, how it kind of highlights, how the light bounces off those off the curvatures. And the key word there is curvatures. So a lot of times our highlights will actually come off of apexes of curves. So anytime you see a curve, you look for the bend, put some light in there. And also you can also use the lamp, the natural light coming off your lamp as a guide. These paints, in terms of more specifically that wine red and burnt umber, have a bit of a shine to it, which you can even see in the video right now. Now, a little thing to note, if this is something new and you find it a little bit hard to follow these shines that are off the model, and that's probably due to when you move the model, the light kind of moves. So if you're finding a little bit tough to follow at the beginning, what I highly suggest is just take out your phone. You can use just your iPhone or whatever like that, and just take a snapshot of it. And actually that you have a frozen image, a still image of where those highlights are falling, and we can use that as an easy guide to help place those highlights into there. So as you can see, just using my brush carefully to map out these lights. Again, we're not worried. I'm not worrying anything about blending. We're just going to be layering up and just allowing the layers to work for us. Make sure to get those little highlights on the rope there. That's tying the neck the neck guard together, I guess. And even the same thing for the arm. There are a lot of small little folds and such, and on a display model, of course, we'll pick all those out. But just for this one, think of the arm as just one big cylinder, and I'm just going to hug the highlight closest to where the cloth meets the armor. Just put pretty much like a line down. Again, don't worry about the straps that cut across the arm that is holding the arm plates in place. We can always cover that later once all of the cloth is finished. Just much easier than trying to maneuver these highlights in between each of them. And even on here, even with these larger folds, a nice thing you can kind of help to give yourself a little bit of the motion is just by following those curvatures again. Definitely taking a look at under a lamp. Have a photograph if you need to. Try it out. It actually does. It actually will make highlighting volumes just that much easier to get used to. And then later on, when you get more comfortable with finding that highlight placement, it just becomes a little more second nature. But as I started off, I used a reference, use a photograph, take a look, and don't think of it as cheating. It just takes a little bit getting used to. And even more so when you get a brand new army, even with these Cathay, there are certain parts where I did take pictures just to study some of the new shapes, because every army has some unique shapes that might be present either to their own geometries and such. And it's always a good little doing a little pre-homework before you start off, just to take a look on where these things fall. And looking where you can take a little bit of extra advantage. Again, there's another, of course, in building up another layer here, just adding more superhero red into the mixture. We're pretty much almost at pure superhero red. I would say it's about, I don't know, it looks around like 80% superhero red to maybe 20% wine red. Somewhere close in that ballpark to get this color in here. We can already start to see, again, this is just straight layering. There's no like blending stage where I'm trying to blend in between. It's pretty small already, so there's not a lot of room to do it. And just using, again, fairly undiluted paint, just keep a little bit of dilution in the brush, just so enough that it helps the paint flow through the brush. But in a sense, I still want a very opaque mark, because you also got to consider we're painting a lot of these guys, so I really want really good coverage. And thus far, all on this red, it has all been one single layer of paint at a time. If you're ever worried that you might be thinking I'm painting with thick paint, undiluted paint pretty much, you're like, is it gonna get chalky or built up? The secret here really is that just let the entire layer dry completely. Don't rush through it. I like to say to a lot of my students, smooth is slow is fast. So just being a little bit more careful, laying down a layer, letting it dry completely before you touch it. The common thing is if you're getting a lot of like bumps and lumps in your paint, it's generally not due to how thick your layer is, but it's also in a combination of you're laying down a layer, and then as it's drying, you're trying to put down more paint, trying to, maybe try to smooth it out. But if you do get a layer, or you do apply a layer and it seems kind of patchy, it's also a good idea to just let it sit there. If it's, after you know, if you've done the stroke and it's been like not even like, maybe it's been past like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, just let it dry. Let it dry completely, and then go in there and make your fill, make your correction. Maybe if it's like a little bit, maybe the layer is a little bit hollow or patchy. When you let that dry, then when you paint on top of it, you're not going to get like little bits of rolling paint, because that nastiness, or like the ugliness of the layer that sometimes you might be associated with your layers are too thick, is also due to, you know, not having the layer dry. And then as you're putting another layer on top of this, the previous layer that's trying to dry, you're actually picking up semi-dried paint and kind of like rolling it around, and it's almost, you know, as if like dirt or sand got into like I don't know, some putty or something like that, and it creates a coarse layer. So slow down just a little bit. Smooth is slow, slow is fast. And just for that last layer, and you know, these final highlights layers here, I'm just added in the light red. So that's that kind of orangey red at the bottom. So I added a little bit more. I added more of this light red and just a pinch of ivory. I didn't want to get too, you know, not too much into the pinks. I want a lot more of the superhero red to show. And here, just for the final highlights, just make a note on like how small the highlights I'm actually applying. It's only probably just a few strokes, just like one stroke in width, and the length is, you know, just a couple of dots wide. You know, try to keep them nice and narrow. If you make these highlights nice and small, we will keep most of the red into the work. That's one of the main secrets with this with painting a very rich red. If you notice, I'm not trying to grab this highlight color and trying to run it along the entirety of every single edge. If you were to highlight all the edges with this, then the red starts to turn more like orangey pink, and we lose the that deeper vibrancy of the red that's involved, just due to the total amount of color that we see on the model. So keep them small. Keep them, just be a little more mindful of how much you're going to put down, and we should see some nice results. Even through here, I did in the final result put more, have more of a stronger superhero red apparent. So to correct this one, I did throw a bit of a glaze on at the very end. But all it did is just adjust the amount of superhero red present. But otherwise, the formula and the is exactly the same on the rest of the infantry. All right, so for the gold, I went a bit crazy in doing this mixture. I don't think you don't have to go that insane, but pretty much, you know, mixing up that brown, green, burnt umber, yellow shadow all together, and a little bit of gold and yellow, and I started to apply these on top. Now remember, the trim on this is very, very small, so we don't need to do it's not like a heavy it's not like a heavy version of like N&M. I'm just highlighting the gold trim as if it's just pretend it's yellow. Don't necessarily have to think that I have to think in N&M and do these perfect blends. Again, no blending. It's just straight layers, you know. And to help you if you want to make this a bit more shinier, just be more mindful of the final highlights and the spacing that's in between them. But you know, for the most part, I'm just searching for curvatures on the armor, leaving little gaps. So I'm just looking for little features. So these little swirls, hey, that that'll grab a little bit more attention since there's a curvature there. So I'll put a highlight on there. And yeah, keep it nice and small. The other reason why I chose to do the desaturated gold in acrylics is actually for all the filigree. So all the little emblems and icons. I really wanted to have more contrast to show and punch out, so I used the acrylics. If you don't want to do that, you know, I highly, if you want to just use a metallic, go right ahead. Don't think that you can't do that. The gold from Vallejo is outstanding from the Vallejo metal color, and I quite like that as well. And then you could also use the burnt umber to kind of shade it down in areas. You'll actually see me do that. We'll see that later on with some of the metals that I do. So like, if you notice, I even use the, the steel metallics for the scales. I'm not going to do that in N&M as well. I just wanted these details in specific because I really like them, and I want to have a more control of the light, just to doing this metal. So grabbing that yellow shadow and ivory together to get the next batch highlight. So we're just moving up in value here. Again, I'm taking a look at curvatures, finding the interesting points. And if you want to, again, take a look at under the lamp or in a photograph at the very beginning of like a little light reference. You know, when the model is prime black, you can just take a look at where where some of those lights, some of the highlights, some of the shines like to gather, and just placing some highlights there. But especially when you're doing these small little parts, just be more aware of the charge. That'd probably be the biggest thing that I would keep my eyes on. The charge, again, is how much paint that you actually have loaded in your brush. And the other thing is, keeping it, keeping the paint a little like less undiluted. Again, it also helps because if you have very diluted paint, doing this filigree in particular, you could have an easy problem of it flooding the entire area. We want the paint to sit on top of this and not, flood the area and get into the red at all. I want to see that nice separation, the nice contrasting element with the red and the yellow. And otherwise, following those curvatures, finding little points, and part of it is just like kind of making it up as you go. I just want to make sure that there are breaks in between, so it's, you have some light next to shadow, and then light again, then shadow again. You can kind of move it around as you like. For this tutorial, the shoulder pad is, there's just that should be more covered in another video, in another detail. I do have an excellent series on my Patreon called the Stormcast Challenge that goes much more in depth into N&M and more complex shapes, such as the shoulder pauldron on this character here. So if you like more detailed tutorials and things that are more focused specifically on certain materials and effects, I highly suggest checking that out as well. But to move up into the gold here, it's just we're adding more ivory into the mix. So just be careful if you want your gold to be more yellow, more saturated, more vibrant. Add more of that golden yellow into this mix. But in this instance here, I do not want to get to pure golden yellow because I want it to be more desaturated. And I start just adding in more and more ivory as I move up into the light stages to help it punch out with shine, keeping those highlights nice and small. We really want to, I really want to make it a bit more shinier. So, less is more in this sense when you want to make something shine. If the highlights are too large, that starts to make the appearance that the material is more matte in nature, so less shiny. You can see, especially on this arm guard, you can see how much light is on the left side of the arm guard facing forward, and there's a gap in between, so when it moves to the central part of the guard, then the light comes back. So that little bit of breathing room makes a really big difference in helping our desaturated yellowish gold to stand out. And just also for the highlight placements of the belly plate here. A good thing is I'm gathering the light more to the top and to the center. So I'm thinking of it, painting the highlights kind of spherical, keeping the highlight in the center and at the top because the light's coming from above. And then just applying little dot highlights on the outsides just to fill in a little bit of light. But again, I leave a little bit of space for some shadow. So it just gives that nice little extra shine appearance to it. And again, keeping the paint pretty thick, pretty undiluted. But just watch your charge again. Like even you can see the amount of paint that I have on my brush. I keep it nice and low. And even on the hand that I'm holding the model, you can always, there's always some paint marks on my thumb there. And I'm either, when I'm picking up the paint, it's either I'm going to, wipe a few extra brush strokes off on my thumb or on a kitchen towel, my paper towel there, just to remove some excess charge so I'm not blobbing the paint down and I'm getting just enough on the miniature so I don't flood the area. And of course you can see just adding some more ivory into the mix pretty much for this final highlight. And I think you can guess it, keep it really small. So these little final highlights are literally just dots, nothing too much. Maybe one of the big ones is on that plate there. But yeah, do little dots and it should come out pretty nice. The same thing on the central medallion here. I wonder if anyone knows and wants to comment in it, if anyone has the Arcane Journal. Games Workshop didn't send it to me, so I don't have the book. But I wonder if they actually do have in their Warhammer world what that word is in the central gut. A lot of those times in those decorative medallions in the center are actually a stylized word that's in the center, and it's either mirrored, so you might get a double meaning, or an emphasis. Come the times is like, if you want to be like happy, you just put one character, and if it's like two people getting married or a celebration, it's double happiness, so you just put that character twice. But I'm just curious on, I don't know, if the Arcane Journal or anything written says like what the icon is supposed to be. Maybe it's the name of one of the Dragon Lords. I have no idea. But if you know, let me know. It'd be good to know. And just for fun, good to see. I just want to show you a little bit more on the quick shoulder pad there. I wasn't going to spend an elaborate amount of time on it, but just enough so I think it jazzes up the unit champion nicely. And as a bonus, after doing the golden highlights, I wanted the red to punch out a little bit more. So going in there and just doing a little bit more into the red, again adding a little bit more ivory into the light red mix, keeping those highlights nice and small. And it just helps me balance out the brightness of those two items, because I wanted those, in particular those two, to work really, really well. Sorry I did not get an image of me doing it, but I used the AK's Deep Shade Black mixed with a little bit of their deep shade medium, and I used it as on all the chain mail. You can also use like black ink, which is like, you know, a classic old school recipe, but I like my metals a little bit more matte. So I found that using like a contrast paint, that's exactly what that deep shade stuff is in a sense. It's, you know, they have the new third gen, the third gen ones, which I've never tried yet. But the deep shade stuff is really cool too. And after doing that, now I'm just going back in there with a highlight of heavy metal from scale 75 and just picking out the top of some of those scales and a few rivets, and that should be it. Now for this tutorial, the head in itself for this this person could be an entire video in itself on how to paint skin. Just to give you guys a little bit of a paint list. Again, more burnt umber, salmon. There's some peach and chibi skin to get a few various tones. The light blue in there is to mix in with our skin tones to get a little more desaturation. And again, ivory comes back and helps us give out some highlights. If you're wondering how to paint this head and other skin projects, I actually have a new upcoming tutorial challenge series, the Skin Challenge, which I'll be conducting in shortly. And, you know, we're going to go into more detail on how to paint more detailed Warhammer heads and other parts, like other skin body parts, such as like arms, torsos, and everything to do with skin. So I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of, you know, the paint list that you guys can achieve, or I use to achieve on the sergeant's head. For the other parts of the steel, so mainly just for the weapons, I didn't do this you could do this on the scales if you like, but I did more on just the weapons, just taking a little bit of burnt umber and making a glaze out of it. Yeah, it's pretty much the only time I'm using a glaze in this entire tutorial and these entire models, is just making a glaze out of it. So thinning out like 4 parts, you know, 3 to 4 parts water to paint, and just pushing that glaze into the recesses. And then to pop out our metals back again, I am just taking some speed metal from scale 75 again, just a bright steel, and just running this along some of the edge highlights along the blade, as well as just doing little nicks and scratches. They're kind of hard to see on the camera. They're more visible in person. But on the camera, it's only like a very sweet spot when you hold it, you actually get to see it. But in person, you can see them, and especially when it's cut across the ochre glaze, it looks great. Now for the banner, we're gonna start off, and this is how I'm doing like the more bold, the gold and yellow. So not the desaturated yellow, but this is the banner of the gold, yellow, and the other elements are going to be in the army. The ionic colors go really nicely through the airbrush with their supplied thinner. I also tested out for other reasons. If people like using the Tamiya X20A thinner, that also works really well with the ionic colors as well. So building up the layers, so the first layer was the yellow shadow, and then now I'm mixing some 1-to-1 part mix of yellow shadow and golden yellow through the airbrush. I'm running this around, I would say about 20-25 psi with a 0.2 needle on my harder Steinbeck. But the most important thing is actually your trigger control, as well as the ratio of thinner to paint. So I like to run your paints quite thin through the airbrush. So using either like 2-to-1, so 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint, and you know, go light. You know, don't think of it as you need one big thick coat. You need several thin ones. And again, just like brush painting, let it dry. And also, you also have to be wary that with paint, especially through the airbrush, it's going to appear more saturated as it's wet on the model. But again, let it calm down, let it dry. You can air dry it or just use the air from your airbrush to let the layer dry so you get a real honest gauge on how this color is going through. I noticed particularly with the yellow, when it first comes out, it looks it looks a lot stronger, it's a lot shinier, but as soon as you let it dry, it really dulls down and mattes out. So, plan accordingly. If you also notice that the cape, or not the cape, the banner itself has, you can kind of see the pole through it. So the aiming and the angle of here is very, very important. So I'm aiming from a very shallow angle, aiming from the top and down diagonal. So on the left side of the banner there, we're going to catch all the highlights. There's going to be a nice shadow where the banner pole is creating a crease on the banner itself, and then comes back into a little bit of a highlight on the bottom right. But the majority of the light should be on the left side of the banner. Therefore, we get a nice natural shade and more definition with that yellow on the banner. Again, just doing some little bits of corrections here. The very top part kind of dried, so I can kind of see how the color is developing, and nice and slow. Barely having the trigger open. Last thing you want to do is have a ton of airbrush or a bunch of paint coming out at once. Be nice and slow. Nice soft trigger rock. And never painting the airbrush at a fully open state with the trigger. Keep it nice and slow. And I always like to say for the airbrush, it's a fast tool, but the number one reason why I want to use the airbrush is not necessarily for speed. The first thing I always want to use it for is the finish. Could you imagine doing all this yellow, this flat area by a brush? Wouldn't it be the nicest time I think I could think of spending my time painting other things, even though I am painting a lot of yellow right now for the next Cathay project. I didn't use an airbrush. I used all of my brush, but that has a lot more complex shapes that are on there. And I think the banner is a good idea to bust out the airbrush. Also, you haven't noticed, I've wrapped my character, the standard bearer, with it's just like cling wrap, some tape. Make sure none of the overspray gets on anywhere, so I don't have to dodge. I don't have to dodge him with the airbrush at all. And then finally, for the last highlight here, mixing that golden yellow and ice yellow together to get the final highlight. Ratio is around a 1-to-1, I would say. But again, keeping this nice and light, and also keeping that paint thinned out for the airbrush. Again, at least 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint. For this final highlight, one of the things I would highly recommend, especially when working with yellow or high value, it might be very hard to see where your paint actually falls right when you use it. So I would suggest, if you're not very comfortable with it, do a small spray and let that dry and see the effect on what type of, like, how strong your mark is leaving on the area. The last thing you want to do is do the entire area, and then you notice that you haven't left any space for the previous layers at all, and it just comes out completely flat. It's always good to do a small test area, see how the mark dries, and make a note of how much thinner in paint they used roughly, and then just take it take it from there. You know, there's not an exact, I'm not taking a pipette and measuring exactly how much thinner to paint. It's just roughly around a 2 to 1. But with the thin enough paint, we can always modulate, you know, how much coverage we do simply by, you know, your trigger control, having just a little bit of like a thinner application and slowly building the layer up. And, you know, once you're comfortable with the color, you know, you'll probably get a better feel for it, and you could probably speed things up. But you know, we should always walk before we run. And when it comes to like learning a brand new army scheme, take your time on like the first banner, the first time you're doing this yellow, and then after you nail that one, then we can build up our confidence and keep moving ahead. The last thing you want to do is, you know, get off painting yellow on the wrong foot, and you know, being discouraged, especially if it's, you know, a scheme and an effect that you really, really like. Now to give you guys some pointers on the freehand of the banner, the first thing is really just about sketching and using thin lines to map out the desired character. Now you should know what character you want to place before and have a good written example right next to you so you can use as reference. And what I'm doing here is I'm just using ivory or just any kind of light cover and just painting in the thin lines of the character to start off with and just mapping it out. You know, finding out where the center of the banner is, putting in a couple of ticks and going from there. The character that I'm going to be writing, I'm going to ask just one thing. Please do not copy this character. Just for simple reasons, it's my my family's last name. So from my mother's side, my mother's last name is Jung, and this is what it says on the banner. So I hope you find your own characters that you'd like to write, but unless your last name is Jung also, please don't. But moving forward, you can see how I have like a very, just a stick outline of this. And with any type of freehand, one of the biggest things with freehand painting is always start nice and thin, start small, and you can grow the design in a sense. So by running, by just doing the stick, just by doing these lines of the Chinese character right now, then I can start to increase the width and build it up nice and slowly. You know, the last thing you don't want to do is like make the design too big and you have to use a lot of yellow to cut back. I really don't want to do a lot of cutting back onto this because, you know, it's a clean yellow airbrushed banner. So I'm like, okay, try to minimize as much slippage as possible. So even here, you get to see how I'm doing that bottom stroke and just start getting larger and larger as we get through there. And slowly you start building out the design. The little extra brush marks, little extra flares only come when I have the structure of the character down. Don't start doing all these little details early. Get the main structure out, grow it to the size you need, grow it to the width of each stroke that is needed. Then you can start adding little doodads and those little things there. And after I have the structure of the character down, these are the exact same colors we use for the red, the same red recipe we're using for the cloth. So now I can also just look at the template of my airbrush where my lights and shadows have fallen naturally with the airbrush and just use that as a direct guide on where these are going. So even on here, you get to see this transition of the fold from light into shadow. So in the shadow is primarily going to be our wine red mixed with a bit of burnt umber. In that transition, we'll probably, will be more of the superhero red. And then in the highlights is going to be that more of that light red mixed with maybe a little bit of ivory and some in there. So you can see where these little transitions are going. But yeah, the shading only comes near the end. Get the box, get the model of your characters down. Just remember, You can always expand the character as necessary and just go nice and slow, doing line at a time. And at the finishing part here is I'm just cleaning up a couple of stray marks and just adding a little bit more punch into the yellow highlights themselves. Since you airbrush the yellow, the color itself through an airbrush can always be a little bit weaker. But if I take the same highlight color that I did, the golden yellow plus ice yellow, this is where I would dilute the paint more, so it's a little bit thinner. And I'm just repainting it on top of the banner to get a little bit more punch out of it. Last but not least here is the base itself. The base is really easy. Just by flocking in a couple of different types of grits of sand with some PVA glue, let that dry. And then I'm taking some more that AK deep shade stuff, but this time I've mixed it in with Liquitex Burnt Umber ink, having it a very thick mixture here, and just applying that over the entire rock of the model. I didn't do this prior because with a little bit of the ink and the transparency, those rocks at the above will just be a little bit lighter when they dry, providing a nice natural shade, and don't have to do too much into there. So that's how it looks kind of, when it dries. If you find that if it's a little bit brighter, add a second layer. If you want it darker, totally up to you. Then I'm just taking like a couple of different colors of gamer grass, and just applying it to the base. And what I find that helps stick this gamer grass a little bit nicer is to activate the glue. That it comes with a little bit of glue at the bottom of the gamer grass. Is I take a little bit of this gravel and sand fixer from AK, use a pipette, and just put a couple of drops on the patches of this gamer grass. That kind of like activates the glue more and sticks that thing straight down to the base. And there you go. Sorry, the last thing I didn't get to show on the tutorial, I totally forgot to film it, is the little jade emblems onto there. Those colors onto there are really simple. It's literally jade and light jade. To get a little bit of the shadow, you can just mix some black in with some jade and then just highlight up and just catch a few of the edges and just pick a side of the gem. Sorry, I didn't get a chance. Totally forgot to turn on the camera for that part of the filming of this tutorial. Kind of sucks, especially when it's named Jade Warriors and I forgot to film that part. But those two parts are really simple. I only use the jade for the gems themselves. But other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you really enjoy how I've portrayed my Cathay Warriors and the state troops that are shown here. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to leave them in the comments on either on YouTube, or if you're watching this on Patreon, as well as if you want more detailed tutorials, you want to join an exclusive community of really amazing painters and hobbyists and creatives that I'm blessed to always interact with every week. Come join us on there. We have there's plenty of tutorials on there. If Cathay is going to be your jam, or many other subjects, and including not just Warhammer models, but also busts too. And finally, sorry, it's a whole big mouthful. I know you guys have been watching for a while, but if you really also want to try out some Ionic paints and you want to get a little bit of a sweet little discount on it, I do have a nice discount code for you guys for 10% off. So if you shop at MIG Ammo and with the discount code Ionic BB10, you receive 10% off of your entire paint order, as well as give a little kickback to me as well. And just so if you want to have a chance to pick those up, and let you know that a little bit of support comes from me is a long way. I really truly appreciate it. And other than that, I'm done. Thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one. Happy painting.